Before the Capitol had columns, and before Washington had streets, the US government was adrift, meeting in borrowed rooms, fleeing advanced armies, and debating its future in taverns and college halls. It was messy, impermanent, and beneath it all was a question that no one had fully answered. Where would a government like this even belong? The answer to that question would be a statement in its own right, the most powerful-looking American building in history, the Capitol building. So, how did it really come to be? Stay tuned to find out as we discover the history of the United States Capitol building. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's head back to a time when the US wasn't even a country yet. It was just a collection of colonies, some of whom had become angry and uncertain about what they were becoming. Congress met in places like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Lancaster, York, Princeton, Annapolis, Trenton, and New York City. Each city served briefly and none felt permanent. The situation was a bit undignified, as they'd occasionally be reduced to borrowed spaces, ranging from taverns, college halls, or chambers in state houses. With that in mind, the earliest of these, Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, hosted the First Continental Congress in 1774. It was a guild building, modest yet well built, and it witnessed the first unified colonial protest against British rule. However, when the Second Continental Congress convened, it relocated to Independence Hall, where ideas of rebellion gave way to revolution, ultimately leading to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Then, during the American Revolutionary War, Congress fled south to Baltimore, specifically to the Henry Fight House, to avoid British troops. From there, it shifted constantly, sometimes due to conflict and occasionally due to political strain. And by the time they reached York, Pennsylvania, Congress operated under the early framework of the Articles of Confederation, a structure so weak it couldn't levy taxes, enforce laws, or even guarantee payment to its own soldiers. Then later, at their makeshift headquarters in Princeton, the government tried to manage the aftershock of war, whereas Annapolis saw the resignation of George Washington from his command, a moment thick with symbolism. From there, Trenton hosted the government briefly in 1784 before Congress relocated to New York City, a move that on paper seemed practical, but quickly revealed its flaws. You see, the city was already a thriving commercial hub, well positioned for trade and influence, but that influence was part of the problem. You see, as a capital, New York was never neutral. It belonged to a powerful state with its own agenda. And many in the Union, especially those from the South and the interior, saw that as a threat to the balance that they were trying to build. There were also symbolic problems. New York City was many things: wealthy, dynamic, ambitious, but it was also regional. And because of that, America faced the risk that New York would overrepresent one part of the country, one culture, and one vision of what the United States could be. You see, leaders like Jefferson and Madison believed the capital should represent all states equally, not reflect the power of one. So, while New York served as the nation's capital for just 5 years, it was more than long enough for Congress to realize that the city wasn't built to hold the nation together. What they needed wasn't just a location. It was a purpose-built seat of a government, a new city, and a clean slate. When Congress passed the Residence Act, it settled one of the most delicate post-war questions: where to plant the capital. Northern states wanted it to be near the money, southern states wanted it near plantations. The compromise was to put it on the Potomac River, roughly equal distance from New England bankers and Virginia tobacco lords. The new federal district would be carved from Maryland and Virginia. And the city itself, well, that would be designed from scratch. Enter Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, a French-born engineer who envisioned something more than streets and buildings. He imagined a symbolic landscape, broad boulevards, ceremonial sightlines, and an open national mall. At the city's highest point, on a rise known then as Jenkins Hill, he placed the centerpiece, the seat of Congress. It would be the moral and literal high ground of the American government. Though this plan, grand as it was, would take time to realize. Washington, D.C. itself was still less of a capital city and more of a muddy grid at the time, which is why Congress didn't move there right away. Rather, the federal government remained in Philadelphia for a full decade, while Washington was being carved out from swampland and clay. From 1790 to 1800, Congress continued to meet in Philadelphia's old county courthouse, next door to Independence Hall. Meanwhile, back on the Potomac, the new Capitol wasn't just being surveyed, it was being built. Eventually, L'Enfant was dismissed from the project for clashing with landlords and ignoring commissioners. He refused to compromise his layout. The Capitol building, the centerpiece, would still crown the city. As for the politicians, they were very hands-on throughout the process. Such was the case in September of 1793, when President George Washington arrived in person for a ceremonial laying of the Capitol's cornerstone. The political ritual was held under the scorching sun and witnessed by local officials, stonecutters, and appointees. That single stone marked the beginning of what was meant to be the most important building in the Republic. As for the design, that came from William Thornton, a physician with no formal architecture training, but whose neoclassical proposal had caught Washington's eye. It drew from Rome, from Enlightenment, and from the imagined dignity of a government still trying to define itself. And as nice as that might sound, I need to emphasize that construction was anything but smooth. Although the stone came from nearby quarries, skilled labor was scarce and materials had to be hauled over bad roads. At that pace, the building rose slowly, wing by wing and brick by brick. Congress wanted to see more progress, and in the early years, they kept tabs through reports from city commissioners who sent regular updates to officials in Philadelphia. There were plenty of disagreements over cost, delays due to weather, and changes in design. Still, this masterpiece of a building began to form. Now, when the budget ran low, continued funding was cobbled together from federal appropriations and land sales inside the district as plots in this prestigious new capital were offered to private buyers, with the hope that proceeds would cover much of the further construction. Still, interest was tepid, and the federal government ultimately had to make up the shortfall. The Senate wing was the first to be completed as workers rushed to finish it in time for the government's planned move-in in 1800. Though the House chamber wasn't yet finished, so its members met temporarily in quarters on the opposite side until the entirety of the Capitol building was finally ready. When Congress arrived in Washington in 1800, the Capitol building was still rough around the edges, but for the first time in American history, the US government had a seat it could call its own. Though to be fair, the Capitol's early years were still marked by some rather extreme vulnerabilities. Such was the case in 1814, when British troops marched on Washington during the War of 1812. The bastards set fire to the Capitol, reducing its wooden-framed interiors to a charred ruin. The outer walls survived, but just barely. And in the smoldering aftermath, many questioned whether the city, let alone the building, should be abandoned altogether. Fortunately, America decided to rebuild. The restoration was overseen first by Benjamin Henry Latrobe and later by Charles Bulfinch, who completed the original dome and added the Capitol's signature central rotunda. By the mid-1800s, the country was experiencing rapid growth, and the building had to keep pace with it. 2 new wings were added to accommodate the swelling ranks of Congress, and in 1855, work began on the now iconic cast iron dome. It would take more than a decade to complete, rising above the structure even as the nation below fractured into a civil war. In early 1861, senators and representatives from the seceding South states began resigning from Congress, only to return to their home states to take post in the forming Confederate government. Now, for a brief time, they met in Montgomery, Alabama, and swore in their own president. But within months, the Confederacy moved its capital to Richmond, Virginia, barely 100 miles from Washington. And it's rather crazy to imagine this as a basic concept. A rival republic setting up their government practically within marching distance of the American capital. So, in that context, when Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office in 1861, the new dome was still rigged in scaffolding. Still, he insisted it be finished, remarking, quote, "If people see the Capitol go on, it's a sign we intend the Union shall go on." And this is exactly why the dome became more than architecture. It became a message. In 1865, Lincoln's second inaugural address was delivered from the steps here. And after his assassination just weeks later, his casket was brought back to the building for a moment of national mourning. His final resting place would be in Springfield, Illinois, of course. Over time, the Capitol became a stage for some of the country's most defining moments. The passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, abolishing slavery, took place within its chambers. Many decades later, it would be the setting for FDR's wartime addresses, LBJ's Great Society vision, and the certification of presidential elections in times both routine and historic. The building has also stood through moments of deep crisis. In 1954, Puerto Rican nationalists opened fire from the House gallery, wounding 5 representatives. The year 2001 also saw a very close call during the hijacking attacks on September 11th, when United Airlines Flight 93 was headed east. According to the official 9/11 Commission report, its likely target was the US Capitol, but fortunately, it never got there. And then, of course, we had that turmoil in 2021, which is all fresh enough in our memory, so regardless of how you saw the event, I think we get the point. What's important here is that in good times and bad, the Capitol has lived on, making it a priceless symbol in the concept of America. And with that being said, we have to remember it's also a physical place, one built to be used, adapted, and walked through. Now, the rooms have changed over time. Statues have been moved, chambers reconfigured, and so on. But even so, it's time to have a look at what's inside. Let's begin at the Capitol Visitor Center, the most recent major addition to the building. Opened in 2008, tucked beneath the East Front Plaza, it's where nearly every public tour starts. It's modern, sleek, and designed to handle the crowds without disturbing the business upstairs. And at its heart is Emancipation Hall, a bright, spacious chamber anchored by towering statues and interpretive displays. Its name is a tribute to the enslaved laborers who helped build the Capitol, and that acknowledgement is one of the first things you see here. Once inside the original structure, we descend briefly into the Capitol crypt, a circular columned space directly beneath the rotunda. Now, despite the name, it's not a burial chamber, although it was intended to be. This was where George Washington's tomb was supposed to go, but he was ultimately buried at Mount Vernon instead. Anyhow, on the floor is a stone compass which marks the point from which all street numbering in Washington, D.C. originates. Climb the stairs from here, and you'll enter the heart of the building, the rotunda. Towering, echoing, and undeniably dramatic, it's more than just a room, it's an American ritual space. The eye immediately goes up to the frescoed ceiling, where an artwork titled The Apotheosis of Washington watches from 180 feet above. Surrounding these circular walls are massive historical paintings, such as a work titled Declaration of Independence, as well as one titled Surrender. Now, you might be asking, what's the point of all this? Well, this is where the Republic remembers itself. Let's zoom out a little bit. To look at the spaces encircling the rotunda are hallways lined with Brumidi's murals, known as the Brumidi corridors. These richly decorated passageways are packed with classical symbolism and allegorical figures, an American attempt to match the visual language of Rome and the Renaissance. Curated in sections over decades, they've become one of the Capitol's most unique artistic features. And then you step through into the National Statuary Hall. Although this was the original chamber of the House of Representatives, it's now home to the National Statuary Collection, featuring bronze and marble figures sent in by each state to honor their notable citizens. It's a domed, semicircular room with rich acoustics, so rich in fact that at one point, it had a notorious echo problem. Legend even has it that you can hear a whisper from across the room, a piece of trivia that I indeed remember from my 8th grade school trip to DC. From there, we follow the corridor to the House chamber. This is where the full House of Representatives meets, 435 voting members plus non-voting delegates, all of whom are seated in semicircles beneath the gallery. The speaker's stand is at the head, flanked by the American flag. You all know this spot. This is where the president delivers the State of the Union. It's also where law lives or dies by the vote. Crossing over to the Senate side, we enter the Senate chamber, which is quieter, smaller, but no less consequential. The layout is nearly identical to the House, but more intimate. Senators still use desks that date back to the 19th century, many with drawers carved or inscribed by long-gone hands. The room itself has hosted everything from Civil War debates to Supreme Court confirmations. Adjacent to it is the old Senate chamber, preserved as it appeared in the early 1800s. It's a museum-like space now, elegant and also domed. This is where the Senate gathered until it outgrew the room until 1859. It's the place where Henry Clay and Daniel Webster thundered across the aisle, and where the Compromise of 1850 was forged. Below that, we find the old Supreme Court chamber, a vaulted, red-draped room with heavy furniture and curved stone ceilings. From 1810 to 1860, this is where the highest court in the land met, where Chief Justice John Marshall helped define constitutional law. Today, it sits quietly as a historic exhibit. Now let's look above, to the attic spaces and interior shell of the dome. This is where maintenance walkways are found, along with narrow staircases that wind through the structure. But at the very top rises the Statue of Freedom, perched at the very apex. You can't go that high unless you're with an authorized maintenance crew, but just beneath it, the view from the uppermost cupola would be unmatched. Apparently on a clear day, you could see across all 4 quadrants of Washington from up there. The mall, the monuments, and the city. Back down below, we travel through the Capitol tunnels, a web of underground passageways that connect the Capitol to its office buildings and the Library of Congress. Some spaces are no more than simple walkways, but there's also a private subway system down here, used by members and staff. We've got a video about that topic on the channel, so you can click the card on screen here to watch that next. Back outside, the Capitol grounds spread out in every direction. Designed in part by Frederick Law Olmsted, yes, the same man who co-designed Central Park, the landscape includes terraces, fountains, winding paths, and a hidden brick summer house tucked into the western lawn. This design wasn't just aesthetic. It was meant to frame the building, to give the Capitol the setting worthy of its purpose. And that's the story of the Capitol building, one of America's greatest landmarks. I hope you enjoyed the video, though I must confess that I left out one pretty important part of the story, since we talked about it in another video about New York's banished statue, and it turned out to be rather controversial. I don't really want to get canceled again or anything like that. But if you're interested in that story, you can click here to watch it. And otherwise, until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.